What kind of action does your keyboard have? And if you don't know, I can guarantee it's affecting the way that you play. When looking at playing, it doesn't matter so much about what chords to play, which chords, what the fancy chord progression is, or even daily practice. The type of action that your keyboard has will, without a doubt, affect your technique and your skill and development. There's so much to discuss on the topic of music and technology. And if you're just getting into it, you need to go check out mychurchband.com/jumpstart. You can download my free guide where I walk you through step by step exactly what to get and where to get it if this is your first time or if you're just getting into something like this. I tell you exactly what to get and where to get it just to give you a jump start on music tech. So let's discuss keyboard action. So what is keyboard action? Keyboard action is the way a keyboard or a key bed is designed to interact with the musician that's actually playing it. Generally, there are four types of keyboard action. You have your synth or unweighted, and then you have your semi-weighted or spring action. Then there is the hammer weighted, and you have your combination with hammer weighted with a distributed grade or graded weighted or graded hammer weighted keyboard. Depending on what your keyboard action is, it's going to influence the way you would approach playing music on it. So number one is our synth action. And now this type of keyboard, what I have here, this organ that I'm actually building, it's a synth action. You can tell because the keys are, of course, plastic, and there aren't any weights or any kind of resistance playing it. There is some resistance, but that resistance is built not by an actual metal spring or some spring mechanism. The type of mechanism it is a piece of plastic, very thin, that gives it some flexibility. So when you play it, you have some bounce back, but it's not as heavy as you would be playing with an acoustic piano. Now, these type of keyboards, like this one I got here, it was very inexpensive. Between the two of them, I probably spent less than $300. And these are what's called MIDI controllers. You don't know what a MIDI controller is? I talk about that in this video right here. But with these, people tend to make this number one mistake. They want to get into playing keys, and they don't want to break the bank because, hey, they're either doing it for themselves or their kids, their son or their daughter. And you know how kids are, they may change their mind. And so they get the cheapest thing they can find. Now, if we're talking about a 2-year-old child, you want to give them something that they can bang all over the place, drool on, and throw down the steps. All right, you can get them a synth-weighted or synth action keyboard. You didn't spend a lot. However, if you're serious about getting into playing keys, or if you have a child that you want to teach or you want to get lessons for, this is probably the worst thing that you can do for them. Understanding that whenever you play a synth action keyboard and you're starting to learn, the hand development, your manual dexterity and manual development is going to be hampered because you're not getting the response that you could get in playing a more heavier action keyboard. So whenever you learn, your technique will be altered. Your technique is going to be affected. Instead of making this type of purchase, there are other things that I'm going to talk about that will be more conducive for you when you're learning how to play. Now, this is not to knock this. I mean, I'm putting this organ together, and this is emulating how an organ would feel. And not only for that, when I make tracks, if I'm doing something like that, I'm going to use a synth weighted or a synth action keyboard. I may not necessarily want the weight behind it. It's not exclusive, but for example, I may use it to put some drums in. I may use it to do some horn stabs or some organ parts, of course. And where I don't need the weight, the weight behind the keys isn't necessary to what I'm trying to accomplish. Now we have our semi-weighted. The semi-weighted is a category where you typically won't find this on a keyboard that's made to play piano sounds or even a cheaper one. This semi-weighted has a spring behind it. There's a spring mechanism that gives more resistance than it would a synth action, but not as much resistance as, say, a weighted keyboard or a graded weighted keyboard, a graded hammer keyboard. And with the spring action, you're going to have it on the more expensive keyboards. It's basically emulating an organ. That's where you would have it on these electric organs like the Hammond B3, Wurlitzer, low rate organ. When you take it apart, you will see, you will see the springs behind it. And so that's great for that kind of application because as you play it, you want the action to bounce back as quickly as possible. So with these types of keyboards, the spring-loaded or the semi-weighted, the action bounces back really fast. And whenever you see people doing really fast runs on those things, it does make it a lot easier to play. And the keys are a little bit more sturdy than a synth action. However, you'll find that you won't see that on cheap keyboards. They're either going to be in an expensive organ or an organ clone wheel, like, for example, a Nord or one of the Hammond's clone wheels, it's electric organs or MIDI controller organs, or I think it's called Viscount or Viscount. I can never pronounce it correctly, but those organs that emulate it, you'll have those spring-loaded or those semi-weighted keys on that type of instrument. So next is our hammer action keyboard. This keyboard here, this M-Audio Hammer 88, is a full weighted or hammer action keyboard. And what that means is that internally there are hammers to counterweight the balance of the playing. So it's more of what's called a player's piano, or a player's piano's MIDI keyboard controller. So from the beginning, from the lowest note C here, or right, see, this is A, and all the way up to the C up here, the weight is even as far as what's behind it. I say that because it's not like the next one I'm going to talk about. Now, this would be kind of the middle of the road. This is where you want to start if you're playing, learning how to play piano, learning how to play a keyboard. You don't want to start on anything less than this, because of course your spring-loaded or your semi-weighted is going to be just as expensive, if not more, than one of these, and it won't give you the kind of feel and expressiveness and help you to develop your dexterity in your forearms. You need that strength in order to be able to express properly, playing the piano. Unless this is something that you just kind of do on the side. Again, you can get the Synth Action, Synth weighted, but if you're going to continue in this, something like this gives you the optimal expressiveness in your playing. With the hammer action, while it's somewhat affordable, again, it gives you the expressiveness that comes with an instrument that's in the middle of the range and can help you to develop your dexterity and your technique. Now, if your budget can afford it, what we have is the graded hammer action. Now, the M-Audio, like what I'm playing here, makes a Hammer 88 Pro, and that is graded. And what graded is, it's different from a hammer action, just a normal hammer action, where you have the same weight going from the last note to the first note. You have it in gradations. The lower sound, the lower end of the keyboard, is weighted heavier than the top end, just like you would have with an acoustic piano. Now, this gives you the best dexterity and the greatest expressiveness and truest to its form as far as you playing and you getting your dexterity where it needs to be. Now, of course, it's going to be the most expensive and it's the biggest investment. However, if you can't afford it, I would definitely suggest that you go with something like that, because it will only help you. These types of key beds or these keyboard actions you'll typically find on a digital piano. You're not going to find, on a lower end piano, anything that's probably less than maybe $1,000. You might get something like a controller for about $700, maybe $800. But typically it's going to go over $1,000, $1,500, or $2,000. Now we get into the other area where you have the hybrid. It's like a weighted action or hammer action with a graded action as well. And they take like one key, and there's a bunch of different responses with one key, and it's made out of wood, of course, and it has all this functionality. And all it is basically just a digital piano that looks like a grand piano or an upright, and you can typically they make it like grand pianos. You can put it in your house if you have the space, and if you got the paper for it, it's about 10 grand. At that point, I would just say go out and get yourself an acoustic piano, or try to find one that's used. So with a graded or your graded hammer action keyboard, again, it's going to be different from this. It gives you the closest thing to an actual acoustic piano. So in summary, what we learned about are your synth or unweighted action, and then we have the semi-weighted action that of course works with springs, and normally you would find that in an organ. And then there's the hammer action, like what I have right here in front of me, where the resistance is distributed evenly across the key bed. And finally, we have the graded hammer action, the most expensive, of course, but this gives you the gradations of weight where you have it going from heavy up to light. To learn more about music tech and getting the best keyboard for you, head on over to mychurchband.com/jumpstart. I'll cover all of that in my free guide, Music Tech Jumpstart. If I forgot to mention anything in the video about keyboard action, you can go right ahead in the comment section. You can add it or ask me any questions that you may have. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.